Hello everyone and welcome in the PCB Information Security and Business Continuity webinars. As you are already informed, we organize weekly webinars in a regular basis covering different topics and areas. These webinars are free of charge for anyone to join, and you can also earn CPD credits for attending. So to begin with, in May 2015 of this year, we organized a webinar talking about business impact analysis and its relation to ISO 22317, a new standard that was published by ISO community. A webinar which was presented by PCB trainer Dr. Wolfgang Mahr, Managing Director of Governance and Continuity in Switzerland. Dr. Mahr has an extensive experience in business continuity and is also an active member of technical committees in business continuity involved in Europe and all around the world. So after this webinar, we received lots of comments and many requests to do another session which was focused more on the standard itself, so the standard of ISO 22317 and what the standard covers. Instead of the business impact analysis methodologies. Therefore, together with Mr. Mahr, we have decided to do this webinar today, which will be more focused on ISO 22317 business impact analysis and give you the space to ask all your questions that you might have for this topic. Therefore, without further ado, we will begin the presentation. Please write your questions and comments in the question box in the right-hand control panel, or use the option to raise your hand, and we will give you the permission to ask your questions, and we will answer to them accordingly. Please, Wolfgang, you may start the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on the globe. It's a pleasure and honor for me to present you maybe the youngest or one of the youngest products of ISO. Certainly it's the youngest product of ISO Technical Committee 292. We as a committee developed the standard 22301, and after 2-3 years we realized that it might be helpful to have guidance documents for specific parts of the business continuity management lifecycle as well, and this was the creation of the idea. It was created or proposed by the US delegation in this technical committee to have a help sheet or help document for doing the business impact analysis. I'm trying to go to the next slide. Okay. As you already heard, I am by now a veteran in the BCM field. I started nearly 20 years ago, back in the last century, and worked in many projects and in many circumstances. I translated the BCI good practice guidelines into German and things like that. My mission, apart from doing consultancy and training, is to promote the subject of business continuity. And as we'll find out in the next couple of minutes, I'm always preaching that the BIA, the business impact analysis, is really the foundation, the cornerstone of any BCM approach. Because if you don't do it correctly, then you will be in big trouble, because like building a house which is not put on solid ground will not be a success. So I was glad that PCB asked me to go on and do a special webinar on this new ISO standard. We will go through this table of contents, why a BIA is necessary. Publication status is actually published. We come back to the importance of the BIA in the BCM and DCMS life cycle. If we want to go into these details, what are the outcomes, and we will then switch over to critical success factors and the challenges when doing a BIA, and that exactly to master these challenges is the objective of this new standard 22317, to make life easier and to make this foundation much more solid than if you would just do it according to, let's say, some homegrown method or a proprietary method. So why a BIA? This is a repetition of the last the webinar as well, but I guess there might be other people who might not be that familiar with BIA in this webinar, so I asked, or I proposed to include some elements of the BIA presentation here as well. So why to do a BIA? BCM, as we will find out in a couple of minutes, is a cyclic process, and as enterprises, as organizations grow and mature, we have to reassess the foundations of the business, the core processes, the most important products and services. So it's also part of continuous improvement, and BIA helps you even before anything happens in a situation where you should, in a normal operation, where you should just know your processes better. In many circumstances, many organizations, the processes are not very well documented, and the knowledge on how these processes work rests in a couple of people's heads. But if it's not documented, it's not very mature, and certainly not crisis-proof. So if something happens, and nobody knows actually how these processes really work, and if this knowledge is not distributed in a documented form, then it's not much of any worth. And finally, BIA is the base for business continuity or any improvements of an BCM scheme which might already be in operation. So it's really the base thing which gives us a good foundation for all the rest. We are in a lucky situation that we just talk about a just published standard. It was just last week or the week before last week that it was actually published by ISO. You see the stage 6060 on the bottom line means that it's published. It's not under development. It's not withdrawn. That we can see on the near the top of the screen here. So it's really just press of the printing press. Of course, you may obtain this standard directly in paper form or in electronic form from the International Standards Organization, ISO.org, or from your local national standards body. Let me talk briefly about this exotic abbreviation, ISO/TS. TS is an abbreviation which stands for Technical Specification, which, to be honest, is a bit misleading, as it's not a specification as in a specification standard like 22301, but it's, as it says in the printed title, it's a guideline or provides guidelines for a specific subject, in this case business impact analysis. So don't be misled. ISO 22317 is not a standard against which you can be certified. The only standard which is a specification with certification is 22301. But as ISO developed this code or this designation TS for technical specification, we just have to live with it. Now we know that it's just a guideline or just guidelines for a certain subject, but I wanted just to clarify that it is not a standard against which your organization can be certified against. If we have a look at the famous BCM Lifecycle, we see right at the top at the 12 o'clock position, that's where the cycle is supposed to start. Understand the organization, that's the phase where we do the business impact analysis. As we briefly heard in my introductory slides, that's the phase where we lay the foundation. There's a phase where we really try to analyze the processes, the key products and services, the interrelationships between processes and products and services. So all the complexity of the production of products and services is under analysis in this first phase. Only if we really understand the organization, understand the impacts over time, as the standard prescribes it, we can advance to the 3 o'clock position to determine or to select one or several business continuity strategies. A customer once told me the business continuity strategy is an answer to the BIA or the answer to the questions raised in the BIA. So if I'm asking myself how, it's quite important that, let's say, my electricity supply must not be interrupted, then we have to find an answer to this question: how can I guarantee an uninterrupted electricity supply in an appropriate business continuity strategy? At the 6 o'clock position, we then develop and implement the responses. That's where the BC plans are written, where the teams are put together, and where any provisions to implement the strategy are to be put into use. So if I will stay with the example of electricity, we have determined that we cannot afford that an electricity breakdown may interrupt our production. Then at the 6 o'clock position, we have to implement a mechanism or implement a method, a tool, a redundancy element to reduce the risk and the impact of electricity cuts. At the 9 o'clock position, we have exercising, maintaining, and reviewing. That's where we test everything which we already have put into use. In the BIA phase and the strategy phase at 12 and 3 o'clock, we just produce paper. In the 6 o'clock phase, implementing response, we build systems, we train people, we set teams together, but we, unless we do exercising, maintenance, maintaining and reviewing, we don't know if all what we have implemented really works. So exercising, doing tests are also quite important. Okay, this is the BCM life cycle. It's closed, and after we go through one revolution of the cycle, maybe 12 to 24 months have passed, and the organization will look different, and we have to go to another phase, or we have to repeat the BIA or do a gap analysis. Okay. In a larger sense, we talk about the business continuity management system life cycle, a BCMS life cycle, and this is a slightly different model, but the key elements are plan, do, check, act, and BI is also, of course, a quite important element of the BCMS life cycle. Okay, what are the outcomes? We already hinted on certain outcomes. Here on this slide, I would like to come back to the outcomes and highlight some quite important outcomes. The last line shows 3 dots, so it's not a complete list, but these are most probably the more important outcomes. First of all, if we start with a BC approach, a BC program, we have to start according to a certain scope. We know nothing about, or very little about our threats, about our vulnerabilities, about critical processes, about the relative importance of certain products and services. So we start with an assumption. We start with an assumption which is probably right to a certain degree, but we do not know if it's really the right scope. So, for example, we may say, we think that our production of, let's say, batteries is quite important, because if we cannot produce batteries, our main customers will have a problem and will be quite unhappy. But we produce other things, maybe printed circuit boards, or we produce displays as well. So we may start a BC approach with a certain scope, with a certain assumption, claiming to think that one product or one product line or one site is the most important one which we have to protect. But only after the BIA, if we do a analysis across all business processes or important business processes, we may come to a final judgment on the scope to base the BC program upon. The BI might as well have as a result that we have to change the scope if we were not correct or not completely correct with our first assumption of scope. We will probably have to face a change of scope, and this is a good result, a good outcome of the BIA, so that we really can base the other elements of the BCM life cycle on the correct scope. So we are maybe not only talking about the batteries, but also batteries and displays, things like that. The BIA also serves to identify the requirements of the organization. This is a maybe funny sentence, because everyone will say, well, we know what the requirements are, but in this context we talk about the requirements of a business interruption, how to deal with business interruptions due to whatever causes, and how to cope with these interruptions. This leads to the next point, determination of impacts of those disruptions. One of the specific virtues of BIA is not only to identify the critical processes, products and services, but also determine how the impacts of an interruption would grow over time. So we don't take a snapshot, as it is often done in risk analysis, but we face questions, look for answers. What would actually happen if we go for a breakdown of 1 minute, 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week? Where is our limit of acceptance? Where is the point where we say we cannot afford to live with a disruption longer than a period X of time? So as I already said, as I already claimed, we have to find the relationships between the products, services, processes, activities, and resources. In this context, I will see later, it's later I understand the processes are change of actions which are on a higher level, and activities are parts of processes. course, all these processes and activities need resources, which might be human resources, of course, but also, as I already mentioned, the example of electricity. If we are in a production company, we certainly need products or semi-finished products delivered to us, raw materials maybe, we need IT resources, we need work areas for our staff, and so on and so on. So if we go through this analysis, we see that we need a couple of completely different resources which might be more relevant. As I already said, it's things as facilities, people, assets, supply, financial resources, of course. And anyone who has already done a BA will see that, or have to acknowledge that one of the most complicated things are the description, the detection of dependencies and interrelationships between these players in the BCM lifecycle. So what is all about? We support the BCM goals. I included this picture of a mountain stream, so even in case of a problem with business interruption, we as a company should go on in a certain sense. Maybe we can afford a short business interruption, maybe we cannot even afford a minute or a second of business interruption. So on the bottom line, we are protecting the company value and reputation, and increase or protect shareholder value. And finally, if it's really a big thing, simply the survival of the company. This might well be a situation which, if there is no protection concept, no BCM approach in place, statistics show that companies go out of business, and then there is probably no way back. So coming closer to the standard which actually helps us in obtaining all these outcomes, what would be the range of critical success factors for a BIA? My advice, and it's not only my advice, is follow best practices, just like the BCI good practice guidelines and or the range of ISO standards. The flagship certainly is the ISO standard 22301, which is the specification. It describes in detail what you have to do at minimum, but it doesn't tell you so much how you have to achieve it. This is rather on a higher level shown in 22313, and in more detail focusing on the BI in the 22317. So as we'll see in the second slide from now, this is kind of a hierarchy of these standards. Of course, there are things like top management commitment. I put it in here as well because it's also mentioned in the standard, in all three standards as I spoke about. The BI can be treated or should be treated as a project with all the requirements that project management should fulfill. So it has a beginning, it has in a certain sense an end, it includes resources, it includes a team and sub-teams in many cases. So applying project management with a project manager is certainly a good thing. We also have a situation, of course, and this is in some respect followed in the standard, or examples are given that different approaches are necessary depending on the size and the type of the BI. If I do it the first time or the second time or third time, if I do it let's say, on a higher level or in a more detailed level. All these are circumstances which have to be observed, and this is where the standard gives you some guidance. Of course, it's not a 500-page telephone book describing everything in detail, but it gives you some guidelines, some how-to tips and tricks to try to find a correct approach for the BIA. And the bottom line, actually, we need to have a true and fair representation, so it shouldn't be too little and certainly not too much, but just give us enough insight to really rule out big things that can be overseen, and to have a situation where we safely can assume that we kind of understand the processes, so that we know the big dependencies, and if necessary also the small and maybe hidden dependencies. That's the bigger challenge in doing a BIA. So we need to have one approach which is highly recommended, is to develop a hierarchical view, especially on complex situations. So if you have a production facility, then we have production lines, and the production lines depend on machines and suppliers and supplies and people, electricity, software. It boils down to maybe water supply for cooling a production machine. It's the challenge is really not to forget any of those resources which we assume they are always here, like electricity, water, air, things like that. And we only would then find out in an emergency that we need water, or we need another chemical to keep things going, or to cool things, or to keep process at a certain temperature, whatever. This is very much depending on the situation. Talking about archiving, documentation, it's highly recommended that we use a kind of electronic representation, especially if we come back to certification, or if we will have certification in a certain point in the future. It's important, of course, to have everything documented and all the decisions and assumptions verified, to provide a solid foundation of the BIA and the whole BCM lifecycle, of course. So the challenges are, we have to look at the fine details and have to have commitment from key people in the organization, so that with the right and the appropriate level of effort, we can solve the challenge of doing a BIA. If we approach with too little resources, we run the risk to oversee maybe important processes or important dependencies, and if we apply too much of an effort, we might get lost in detail, or the BI may cost that much money that management will probably stop the process right away. Okay, so I think we now know why such a complex approach like a BA needs some guidance. And if you've got this feeling, you're not alone. Even the specialists in ISO 292, or it actually started in another technical committee in 223, always reported that in their practical lives, when dealing with, when working in their organizations or dealing with customers, there is and was the problem on detailed cookbook on how to do a BIA. Okay, so TC 223 at that time decided to do an initiative. As I said, it was the US delegation brought it up, and I think we started in May 2 years ago. So after 2.25 years, something like that, we managed to publish this standard. It was published middle of the month. It's part of the family of the existing standards 22301. Specification 22313, a guidance document, and also the glossary document 22300. So the main chapters are performing the BIA. As I said, it's considered to be a project, so we need project planning and management. Of key importance is the prioritization of products and services. It's the products and services which we as an organization provide for our customers. And I think it's not, or it's easily understandable that in case of a business interruption, we have to make up our minds what are the most important products and services that our customers request from us, and what products and services can actually be put aside and stopped or skipped. So it's the question of what is most important for us as a supplier, or as viewed from the other side, what is important for our customers. So when we address the situation of a business interruption, we have, in most cases, we have to create a range of priorities of products and services, determining, okay, this product is much more important for us and our customers than another one. So in case our production facility is affected, we would rather do product A over product B. The same holds true for services. Maybe we think that the base, let's say, delivery service or basic call center service is important, but we skip the premium services, or vice versa. So it's really up to these people who in the organization know about or make up their minds on this prioritization of products and services. Only then we know how to react in a crisis and how to develop the other elements of the BCM lifecycle. If we talk about product and service priorities, we know that these products and services are produced by or are delivered by processes. So we have to find out what are the underlying processes, and the processes, as I mentioned earlier, are composed of smaller processes called activities, or defined to be activities. So we have to go through this whole pyramid of operations, or pyramid of activities. Activities build processes, and processes build products and services, to obtain an answer to the big question: what are our high priority products and services? If we go, and we're actually now talking about the contents of the standard, if we have made up our mind what are the most important products and services, we have to enter the analysis and consolidation phase. This is of crucial importance because you can imagine that if during a BIA several departments or several locations or several divisions are interviewed or are working in workshops to obtain this list of prioritized products and services. There will be competition, and if we do not counteract, then the result will be, okay, we need a one-to-one copy of our organization, then we can probably afford to fulfill all the wishes of all the product and service specialists. But of course, this is much too expensive and it's not realistic. So we have to consolidate the requirements or the requests from different information providers in the BIA to create priorities across production sites or production product lines or locations or whatever, because of financial and resource constraints. So analysis and consolidation is a very important part in this process of BIA, which finally, and that's an explicit point in the standard, has to be endorsed by top management. They bear ultimate responsibility and have to accept the results or discuss the results and then arrive at another solution or a different solution. Anyway, top management has to confirm that the findings of the BIA, with all the constraints and all the contradictions and all the competition and all the priorities, is really acceptable for the organization as a whole. So we start, in a certain sense, bottom up, and came up with a great range of wishes, a great range of requirements, and consolidation and top management endorsement in most cases will cut it back to a level which is acceptable for the company. This level of acceptance is, of course, depending on the risk appetite and the financial resources, reputation. So it's a tricky decision process, but it cannot be circumvented, and it has to be fought to the end. Okay, in the standard we also have got annexes on terminology mapping. We in the standards committee have found out and are battling all the time on with different expressions. People call similar things in completely different terms around the globe. So in order for the consumer of the standards to not to get confused, there is a small glossary included to map or to show the equivalence between different expressions. Finally, there is a short section on information collection. I tried to explain that there are different methods how to collect the information, to extract the information from the interview partners or workshop participants during a BIA. All the knowledge which we have to document on paper or in electronic form is certainly centered in people's heads, and we have to extract or collect this information, put it down in a structured way and in a way which shows the results and the way how these results have been obtained. So it's certainly not enough to say, okay, the maximum breakdown or the maximum interruption, business interruption, is 2 hours. without any justification. There must be a justification on customer requirements, legal requirements, contractual requirements, financial impact, whatever, to really understand all the decisions, why certain decisions have been made during when conducting the BIA. Okay, just to show you again my view, and it's also the technical committee's view of the hierarchy, the context of 22317. The base is actually 22301, the BCMS specification. This is the main document, the core document, against which an organization can be certified, and which spells in very clear terms what shall be done, A, B, C, D, to be compliant. And if one of the points is not fulfilled, then you're not compliant on this section of the standard. Okay, so this is the basic authority in this sense. It tells you what to do, and it's not a very voluminous document. It's quite thin. It's not hundreds of pages, but I think just 20-something. I think there's only just one drawing in the document, the BCMS Lifecycle, which I showed at the beginning of this presentation. And that's that. So if you are a specialist on BCM, probably you can work with it, but it certainly helps if you as well use the guidance document 22313, which gives a how-to information on the sections of 22301, but it does of course not focus, although it's much larger than the 01 document. It cannot focus on all the details of the BCMS life cycle. And that's where actually the idea came up for one specific element, the BIA. This technical specification 22317 was developed. It's a kind of mini guidance or special guidance for one aspect, and also TC may decide that other guidance documents on this 22317 level for other elements in the BCM lifecycle, for example, BCM strategy, might be developed. We'll find out in the next couple of months. So this is the situation of the relation to the other standards, and we now come really to the actual table of contents of the standard. It calls or it describes, as with many ISO standards, the prerequisites. So it tells you actually what you need to have to start with this BIA project. It gives information, or it gives guidance on product and service prioritization, as we have seen in the previous slides. It goes down to process prioritization, activity prioritization, analysis and consolidation, and it underlines again the top management endorsement, something which we already have discussed. So it's actually now the numbering, which is the actual numbering which we are talking about. We see on the right side, we see again a circular diagram, which I will explain the next slide. Circular diagram which shows a proposal how to conduct or to structure a BIA. But let me again come to 5.8, proceeds to BC strategy. what is the goal of the BI? Actually to lay the foundation in a certain sense for the business continuity strategy. So while this standard actually is about the BI itself, it tells us in 5.8 about the next or the succeeding element in the BCM life cycle. That's the BC strategy. So it also provides a kind of an outlook to something which is not in the BIA, but which is the next element. Here we see a larger representation of this life cycle. So we start in the top left corner. I hope you can see my mouse pointer with the prerequisites. That's clause 4, context, scope, commitment, resources. If we have the prerequisites in place, we can actually start. We can start with the product and service prioritization, which is in turn based on process and activity prioritization. Again, processes are quite high level, activities are smaller part or smaller chains of actions which build processes. So maybe a couple of activities build one process. Then we have to enter the all-important phase of analysis and consolidation. As I said, that's the question or the issue of too large demands. So we have to, in most cases, cut back the requirements, and finally have everything endorsed by top management. If necessary, we have to go for a second round, but at one point of time we have to be satisfied and terminate this circle for now and proceed to the business continuity strategy selection, which is not part of the standard, but it's kind of a bridge to the next element. If we drill down a bit more in more detail, so we have a look on project planning and management stakeholders. The labels are quite small. I don't know if the screen resolution helps you, but anyway, the information is here as well. So we have as players, as stakeholders, top management. They play an important role in product and service prioritization, and later on consolidation. Then we have got the process owners. For me, that's the most important players, because they actually know how processes are working and how they are doing. And on a lower level, the activity managers responsible for the activities, which again support the processes. So these three groups of stakeholders contribute to analysis and consolidation, top management endorsement, and the, let's call it, exit to development of a business continuity strategy. The underlying bar is project planning and project management. As I said, we are talking about a project, and this justifies that all the mechanisms and all the support tools to run a project have to be in place. Okay, this is just to make it more readable. We talk about 5.6, 5.7, and 5.8, analysis and consolidation, just in case you cannot read that. Top management endorsement, and it actually says after the BI, business continuity strategy selection. So this is on a certain level the process summary. The standard actually talks about the BI process, so we don't talk about or put it that way, we talk about a structured approach structured process on how to perform the BI. The main components actually again are the people, top management, process and activity owners, and they have to provide these deliverables, analysis, consolidation. Top management has to endorse the results, probably talking again to process owners and activity managers. And we will, in 5.8, we also see an outlook on the next step is a continuity strategy selection. It might well be the case that a certain strategy is selected after the BIA, but it might be the case that we have to go back and redo part of the BIA because of certain limitations. If the strategy is too expensive or is not useful or is not realistic because we are lacking the resources, then we might have to readdress the BIA again. But this is not the main subject today. I am finishing this presentation with this slide, just showing you the great lines according to which the authors of this standard propose that you do a BI. I say propose because it's not mandatory. There is no certification. It's just a selection of good practices which has been put together in this standard. And my advice maybe is, if you do a BI, just take the standard, and another good document which might help you is the BCI Good Practice Guidelines, which of course do not focus only on the BIA but on the whole life cycle. But there are also quite important and powerful proposals in this document to help you. The standard is new. We do not know how it will work. Any standard actually is a proposal, and time will tell if this working group which has developed this standard has hit the target, or it has to be enhanced. It's a first proposal, and I think it's much better than having nothing. I hope it will help you, and I'm now ready for your questions. I don't know how much time still we have, or if we will be cut off. I'm at your disposal for your questions. I don't see any typed questions,
Yes,
but maybe there
Mr.
are.
Wolfgang, thank you for that presentation.
Maybe, I've heard that you may also voice your questions by speaking. Okay?
Yes, Mr. Wolfgang, thank you for this great presentation. We do have one question from Elodie. I'm not sure if she is still with us. Can you hear me, Wolfgang?
Yes, I am hearing you, Tim.
So the question is, do we know why the standard was created as a technical specification and not as international standard?
Well, it is an international standard, but a certain type of international standard. As I explained, there are different flavors or different models of standard. The most strict one, I cannot go back. Okay, the most strict one is certainly the specification as such, which really says you have to do or have to show that you have done A, B, C, D, and the auditors come in and they check, have you done A? Okay, show me. What have you done? Have you done B? Okay, show me. And it's kind of a checklist, and it gives a kind of binary result, fulfilled, not fulfilled. Okay, that's really a yes/no standard where you can say, have you fulfilled it? Yes, it's fulfilled. No, where you haven't thought about it, so it's not fulfilled. Then it's the guidance document is a kind of softer document which tells you how to do it. It is a collection of good practices, good experiences in order to fulfill the specification. And a smaller, lighter flavor of the standard is what's called a technical specification, but again I have to add, it's not a specification, it's a guidance. It has been defined a couple of years ago that it is called specification or technical specification, but it is actually just a guidance document, again a how-to document. So the 22313 and 22317 are very much related. I think just because we did this BI document or BI standard on one part of the features or one part of the BCM or BCMS lifecycle, just one element in this range of activities, it has been called a TS, which is which should signify that it is not a major standard, but a document which helps you in a quite specific area of business continuity.
Okay, thank you.
In the bottom, actually, it's you may call it XYZ. It doesn't change the contents, and as I said and keep saying, I don't understand why they call it a specification and it's actually a guidance, so we have to live with this misnomer, you know. But the reason probably is because it's just for one element of a bigger problem area, then they call it TS, you know, maybe to signify that it's not describing the whole of business continuity or the whole of IT security or the whole of quality management, but just one aspect. But I will take up this question with ISO if I keep being asked. Yes. Okay. Are there other questions?
Thank you, Wolfgang. The next question comes from Arthur. Since supply chain continuity is important, and since this is an ISO standard, I believe it would be helpful for sharing with international supply chain partners to ensure they cover the important components that feed into their continuity plans.
Yes, of course, I agree, yes. And maybe I didn't mention the suppliers in the BI itself. Of course, this is suppliers are one of main resources, and especially if okay, I had it here on supplies or suppliers. Everyone is depending on suppliers. We live in an economy with different specialized organizations. Suppliers have to be taken into account when doing the BI, especially if we have a monopoly supplier. For example, electricity, if our building is just connected with one line to our electricity company, this is from a risk management point of view, this is quite dangerous, because this one line can be cut anytime, or the electricity company may have a problem, so then our factories and our offices are black and dark. Yes, it's quite important. There are also standards in the ISO 28000 range on supply chain management. This is also a standard which has been released, I think, this year by this technical committee, and maybe we can even have a webinar on that. But yes, it's important to have the suppliers or the supplier situation addressed during the BI.
Thank you, Wolfgang. Next question comes from Ferdinando. The tools to make the BIA will be attached with the ISO, or have to be developed according to the ISO?
I think neither nor. ISO as an organization does not prescribe any tools. In the annex of the standard there are examples, but it's not mandatory, as nothing is mandatory in this standard. You may use any tools that you want. They just have to fulfill the needs in terms of security, storage, accessibility, long-term data storage, things like that. I'm just going through the standard. Maybe there is something here. No, I don't think it didn't make any sense to talk about tools. No, ISO does not prescribe any tools, so you may use any tool you want, starting with a piece of paper or Word or Excel or PowerPoint, whatever. There are certainly tools available to support the BI and tools available to support the whole BCM lifecycle. So if you are working in a larger organization and it makes sense for you to invest in specialized tools, you are free to do so. No, ISO does not prescribe any tools or prescribe the use of any tools now. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last question comes because of that limited time that we have, comes from Robert. Is there going to be any training about ISO 22317, so the BIA, or ISO 22301 covers that as well?
Yes, maybe PCB will provide a training course. Actually, I had the idea, but I didn't advance a lot in writing a training course for 22317. So we'll see how much the demand is. Yes.
Yes, and I was planning to add on that. So we are working on developing together with Mr. Mahr training about ISO 22317, and once it is ready, we will inform all of our network as we usually do about it. So you can keep up to date with our news in our social media and in our website as well. Okay, so because of the limited time that we have, we will wrap it up for today. And I want to thank to you, Mr. Mahr, for this great presentation, and I hope attendees enjoyed. I want to thank all the attendees for joining us as well. Please be up to date with the webinar, since we will be having another webinar next week on the same time on the same date. And this will continue for the rest of the time. Thank you once again, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to write us. We will be happy to answer you. Thank you, and see you next week. Bye bye.
Yeah, my thanks to the audience. It was a pleasure talking to you. If you are having any questions, I'm happy to answer them, and let's stay in contact. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.